She gave her kidney to a man who never said goodbye, a man who left her, heart aching and her arms full, cradling the child he never knew existed. Have you ever found yourself willing to help someone who once shattered you? This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's about a quiet strength, a choice no one expected, and a kind of love that doesn't ask for applause. Before we begin, may this story remind every woman watching, may your strength never go unnoticed, your silence never mean weakness, and your kindness return to you in ways you never imagined. If stories like this move you, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's walk this trail together. The town of Roseville always smelled faintly of warm bread and fresh linen, a place where time passed slowly and secrets stayed buried. Life moved gently there, on dirt paths and under the watching eyes of neighbors who remembered everything, but asked nothing. For Leona Hart, this quiet suited her. She didn't crave noise or attention. She only wanted peace and a simple, safe world for her daughter. Each morning she laced up her worn white sneakers, tied her hair into a low bun, and stepped into the small local hospital where she worked as a nurse. She was good at what she did, steady hands, warm voice, and a kindness that lingered long after she left a room. No one asked much about her past, and she never offered it. Around her, stories bloomed. Some said she'd been widowed, others that the father of her child had died in an accident. She never corrected them. Sometimes silence protects better than truth. Leona's world was measured in Amira's giggles, patient charts, and the quiet joy of a hot cup of tea before bed. But under that bed, tucked into an old cedar box wrapped in a floral scarf, were 23 letters, not addressed to friends or family. They were all for Caius Varelli. She had written the first one the night after he disappeared. The words poured from her like a dam breaking. Questions, hurt, love still lingering in the ink. The second letter came after she found out she was pregnant. That one was shorter, less poetic, just the facts in a trembling postscript. She has your eyes. None of them were mailed. She would write, fold, seal, then press each envelope into the wooden box, as if tucking away a version of herself that had no place in her new life. It had been 6 years since she'd last seen his face, but she remembered it with painful clarity, those thoughtful, calculating eyes, the slight curl at the corner of his lips when he was amused, and the softness in his voice when he spoke to her like she was the only person in the world. They met by chance. Leona, still in nursing school, had been helping coordinate logistics for a tech conference at the local university. Caius, already gaining attention as a brilliant startup founder, was the guest speaker. She hadn't meant to catch his eye, but he stayed after his keynote, walked up to the volunteers and thanked them. When he reached her, he paused longer than necessary. "You look like someone who asks all the right questions," he'd said, handing her his card. They met for coffee the next weekend. It was supposed to be one meeting. It turned into late-night talks on her front porch, walks under the stars, a quiet kiss behind her mother's house beneath the large sycamore tree that had been there longer than she'd been alive. He told her she calmed his storms, that when he was with her, he remembered how to breathe. She fell in love with him slowly, then all at once, and then he vanished. No warning, no explanation, no note. His number stopped working. His emails bounced back. One day he was there, holding her hand. The next, he was a ghost she couldn't chase. At first she thought he'd been hurt. She called hospitals, searched headlines, checked flights, but nothing. 3 months later, she stood in her bathroom, holding a positive pregnancy test, and everything felt quiet. She had every reason to be bitter, but she wasn't. She was devastated, but she refused to crumble. Leona told no one the truth, not even her mother. She worked through her exhaustion, hid her morning sickness from classmates, and finished nursing school with quiet determination. When Amira was born, Leona held her against her chest and whispered, "You were worth it." The pain of Caius's absence never disappeared. It settled instead, like dust on untouched shelves. But every time Amira smiled, she remembered that even heartbreak could lead to something breathtaking. Still, every once in a while, on quiet nights when Amira was asleep and the world was still, Leona would sit by her window with a pen in her hand and write another letter. They were never angry. They weren't filled with curses or blame. They were filled with pieces of her heart she couldn't say out loud. How Amira loved mangoes and hated socks. How she looked like him when she was deep in thought. How Leona sometimes dreamed that he would knock on the door one day, not knowing what he'd find. She never meant to send them. Writing helped her breathe again, helped her let go just enough to move forward. Until one day, she didn't write a letter. She just watched the news. And there he was. The news report wasn't even the headline. Just a small story on the hospital television as Leona sipped stale coffee in the break room. Tech CEO Caius Varelli battling rare genetic kidney disease, the anchor read. Her hand froze mid-air. Caius. That name hadn't passed her lips in years. But hearing it out loud, like that, stirred something beneath her ribs. The screen showed a photograph. He looked older, thinner, as if success had taken more from him than it gave. She couldn't look away. They said his health was declining rapidly, that he was in urgent need of a donor. That time was short. Leona sat still, cup resting in her lap, her mind spinning in quiet chaos. 6 years. That's how long it had been. He had walked out of her life without a word. No explanations, no apologies, no attempt to return. She had buried that part of her life like old roots beneath solid ground. But now, he was dying, and there was nothing all his wealth or power could do to change it. Later that night, after putting Amira to bed and folding the last of the laundry, she opened her laptop, logged into the hospital's internal transplant database, and quietly ran her information. She didn't expect a match. She shouldn't have hoped for one. But when the results loaded, the air in the room shifted. She was a perfect match. She closed the laptop slowly, pressing her palm against the lid as if it could hold back the storm rising in her chest. Why? Why had life brought this to her doorstep now? She could walk away. No one would know. He'd never find out. Her life was stable. Amira was healthy. She owed him nothing, but something deeper than reason stirred inside her. It wasn't longing, not nostalgia, not even pity. It was clarity. Not every act of love comes with reward. Sometimes it's just the right thing to do, even if no one ever says thank you. Especially then. That night, as Amira slept curled up in her favorite fleece blanket, Leona sat beside her bed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "He doesn't even know you exist," she whispered. "But if I walk away now, who does that make me?" Her chest tightened, not because she missed him, but because she refused to let his betrayal define her. The next morning, she met with the transplant coordinator. "I want to do it anonymously," she said, voice calm but resolute. "You're sure?" the woman asked gently. "I'm sure. No press, no contact, no names. Just one woman's quiet choice to give someone a second chance they never asked for. Not because they deserved it, because it was hers to give." 6 years had passed since the last time Leona saw Caius's face in person. But his name had never left the world's lips. Caius Varelli had become a household name. Interviews, podcasts, glowing magazine spreads. They all called him a visionary, the architect of tomorrow, a man who'd turned a late-night college idea into one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. In the glossy pages and polished television interviews, he always looked untouchable. Confident, polished, witty, a man who had it all. But that morning, the man on the screen looked nothing like the ones from the articles. Leona was eating toast over the kitchen counter, half listening to the television in the next room, as Amira quietly colored at the table. The news anchor's tone shifted, and then came the words, "Caius Varelli, CEO of Varelli Innovations, has reportedly been diagnosed with an aggressive genetic kidney disorder. According to sources, he's been on the transplant list for over 8 months. No confirmed match has been found." The camera cut to a brief clip of him exiting a building, thinner than before, needing support as he stepped into a waiting car. His suit hung off him. His face was hollowed, his walk unsteady. Still surrounded by security and flashing cameras, but undeniably fading. Leona froze. She hadn't heard his name in over a year, not since an article floated through social media about him funding tech labs across the globe. But seeing him like this, fragile, quiet, smaller than the image the world held, knocked the breath out of her. She stared at the screen. The toast in her hand went cold. For years she had held his name like glass, careful not to touch it too often. Now it had been dropped right into her lap, uninvited. Amira looked up. "Mommy." Leona blinked. "Yeah, baby?" "You're staring again." She smiled softly. "Just tired." But inside, something had already started to shift. That night, long after Amira had fallen asleep, Leona sat alone in. Her bedroom, legs tucked beneath her, laptop glowing in the dark. She didn't know what she was doing. Or maybe she did. She opened the hospital portal, scanned through protocols, searched anonymously through the donor registry. Every page she clicked made her heart beat faster. At last, she found it. The cross-match submission. She entered her information, blood type, medical history, tissue markers, consent. There was a long pause before the result loaded. She waited, holding her breath. And then, confirmation, compatible match. She let the air out of her lungs slowly. Her hands were shaking. She was the match. Out of thousands of potential donors, she, the woman he'd once abandoned, the one he left in silence, was the match that could save his life. Leona sat there, staring at the screen, 1,000 thoughts colliding in her mind like waves against a cliff. She could close the laptop, pretend she never saw it, let fate carry him wherever it wanted. He had chosen to vanish, to let her walk through pregnancy, childbirth, and 6 years of raising a daughter alone. And now, here he was, drowning, and she was the only one who could pull him from the water. But would he even recognize the hand that reached for him? Leona closed her eyes. She wasn't doing this for him. She wasn't doing it for closure, not for revenge, not even for Amira. She was doing it because life had given her a choice, and she refused to let bitterness be louder than her ability to do what was right. That was who she was. Quietly strong, steady, a woman who kept her promises, even when no one heard them. She reached for her phone and dialed the hospital's transplant coordinator. "I'd like to speak with someone about an anonymous donation," she said. The transplant coordinator's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paperwork. A framed photograph of a lake hung behind her desk, cracked at one corner but still proudly displayed. Leona sat still, her fingers loosely intertwined in her lap. The coordinator, a woman in her 40s with kind but perceptive eyes, reviewed the file once more before lowering it. "You understand what this means?" she asked gently. Leona nodded. "You'll undergo all the evaluations, blood work, imaging, and if all goes well, the surgery will be scheduled within weeks. But once you choose anonymity, we're bound legally and ethically not to reveal your identity, ever." "That's what I want," Leona said, her voice firm. "No contact, no future reach-outs, no letter exchanges. You'll never get updates and he'll never know it was you." Leona met her eyes. "That's exactly what I need." There was a silence, not cold, but full. The coordinator leaned forward, folding her hands. Most people who choose to donate do it for someone they love, someone they want to save. Leona's gaze didn't falter. "Not all love needs to be seen." The woman paused, then nodded. "We'll start the process." The evaluations moved quickly. The more they tested, the clearer it became. Her body was the right match, but it was her heart that kept being questioned by herself. In private moments, when the house was silent and the weight of the decision pressed into her chest like a stone. On the day of the final clearance, she signed the consent forms without hesitation. No name, no message, no clue of who she was or what she had done. She walked out of the office with a folder in her hand, feeling something between peace and quiet ache. That night, Leona sat at the edge of Amira's bed, watching her sleep, her daughter's soft breathing, her lashes resting gently on her cheeks, the way her hand curled loosely under her cheek, so much innocence wrapped in 6 years of quiet survival. Leona reached out and touched her tiny fingers. "You're the reason I kept going," she whispered. "You saved me. Now I get to save someone else." She stood, turned out the light, and let the darkness settle like a soft blanket. 2 days before the surgery, Leona received a call. "Are you still comfortable proceeding anonymously?" the nurse asked. "Yes." "Understood. Mr. Varelli will be admitted the night before. You won't cross paths." "Good." She ended the call and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked calm, but her eyes held a storm no one could see. Was she angry? No. That flame had gone out years ago. Was she afraid? Maybe a little. The body never forgets the risks. But above all, she was resolute. She would do this not because of who he was to her, but because of who she had chosen to be in the face of everything. Not weak, not vengeful, just strong in her own quiet way. On the morning of the surgery, Leona lay on a hospital bed, dressed in a pale blue gown, 4 already threaded into her arm. The lights were soft above her. A nurse hummed while checking the machines. She turned her head slightly and whispered a silent vow. "You will never know, but I will always know." Down the hallway, in a high-security private wing, Caius Varelli waited under soft sedation. Reporters speculated about the anonymous donor. Some said it was a business partner. Others guessed a fan or someone looking for clout. But no one would ever guess the truth, that the woman he abandoned had been the one to give him life again, and that she asked for nothing in return. Have you ever done something kind for someone who didn't deserve it? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button to follow more tales like this one. Stories of silent strength, real choices, and the kind of love that doesn't always wear a name tag. The day before the surgery, Leona walked the long corridor of the hospital, not as a nurse, but as a patient. It felt unfamiliar, even though she had spent years inside these walls. This time, she wasn't charting vitals or checking pulses. She was handing herself over, not for praise, not for reward, just for closure. The transplant coordinator met her outside the pre-op wing, holding a clipboard and wearing a look of quiet reverence. "You understand everything?" the woman asked. "I do. No one will know. Not your colleagues, not even the attending team. You'll be listed as an anonymous donor in the system." Leona nodded. "That's what I want." The coordinator gave a small pause, as if silently acknowledging the weight of it all. Then she placed a hand lightly on Leona's shoulder. "Most people wouldn't do what you're doing." Leona didn't reply. Not out of modesty, but because no explanation would be enough. She had made her decision. There was nothing left to justify. In the pre-op room, Leona changed into the hospital gown slowly, folding her clothes, with care, as though preparing to return to a life she hadn't quite left. She placed a photo of Amira inside the pocket of her coat before sealing the locker. She didn't cry. She breathed, deep and steady. As a nurse, she had prepped others for this countless times, but being the one on the gurney, it shifted something inside her. A nurse came in to check her wristband and start the fourth. She was kind and gentle, but didn't linger. That suited Leona just fine. She didn't want comfort. She wanted peace. When the surgical team entered, one of the anesthesiologists smiled and asked, "Any last thoughts before we get started?" Leona looked up at the ceiling and whispered just loud enough for herself to hear, "You'll never know it was me, but I gave you life again." At the opposite end of the hospital, in a heavily secured very important person suite, Caius Varelli sat upright in a recliner. His skin was pale, lips dry, eyes sunken with fatigue. The machines around him beeped in quiet rhythm. He hated them. Not because of the sound, but because they reminded him how powerless he truly was. He had built entire cities of code, hired thousands, spoke on world stages, and watched his name rise to the top of every list that once mattered. Now, none of it could save him. Only a stranger could. A stranger whose name he'd never learn. He closed his eyes as his assistant updated him on the donor's arrival. "They've confirmed everything," she said softly. "Surgery will begin soon." Caius nodded, too weak to reply with words. The idea that someone he'd never meet would cut into their own body to save his. It didn't sit easily with him. For all his fame, this was the most humbling moment of his life. He never thought about how many things happened without fanfare. Hearts beating in quiet rooms, lives given in silence, mercy handed out with no receipt. It unsettled him, but it also made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. Small, not in defeat, in perspective. Leona woke hours later in a dim recovery room, the haze of anesthesia still lingering like fog at the edges of her mind. There was an ache in her side, deep, sharp, but familiar. She had known it would hurt. The nurse at her side smiled gently. Everything went well. Leona managed a weak nod. Her throat was dry. Her chest felt heavy, but her heart was light. As the machines beeped softly, she drifted in and out of sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Amira's face. That was her reward, knowing that the person she loved most in the world would one day learn what true grace looked like. Not from stories, but from her. She didn't need applause. She needed rest. As the night passed, the hospital whispered with quiet life. Patients turned in beds. Nurses charted quietly. Lights dimmed. In two separate wings, two people recovered. One with gratitude, one with purpose. neither knowing they were tethered by a history deeper than medicine could explain. Recovery was slower than Leona had expected. The incision ached in waves. Movement sent little jolts through her side, but the pain was manageable. She had known worse. Emotional wounds, after all, never came with anesthesia. She stayed in a shared recovery room for 48 hours, careful to avoid attention. A nurse who didn't know her from the staff list asked if she wanted to call family. Leona smiled softly. "No one needs to be here. I'm okay." What she didn't say was this: her daughter was already enough. Amira didn't know why her mother was away for a few days. She had been told it was a hospital work trip, but Leona had left a note in her backpack that morning with a drawing of 2 hearts and a line between them, always connected. The first time Leona tried to stand, she winced and had to pause. The nurse at her side offered to help, but Leona held up a hand, took a breath, and pushed through the pain. 1 foot forward, then another. Step by step, she walked to the window and let the morning light hit her face. Across the campus, in a secluded private suite, Caius was also recovering. His body was reacting well. His color had returned slightly. His energy flickered back in quiet bursts. He had asked for fewer nurses, more silence. He stared at the ceiling often, wondering who had saved him. They wouldn't tell him. They refused to share even the most basic detail. He didn't like being helpless. He wasn't used to mystery. But this was different. This wasn't a riddle to solve or a game to win. This was a life, freely given, and it left him quiet. Not the silence of confusion, but the kind that humbles a man who realizes he no longer controls the story. He placed a hand over the fresh bandage on his side and closed his eyes. 2 floors down, Leona sat quietly in her hospital bed, tracing circles on the blanket with her fingers. Her mind wandered, not to now, but to then. It was raining the night Amira came into the world. Not the dramatic kind of rain people remembered, but the soft kind that made everything feel heavy and still. Leona was alone in a cramped hospital room, gripping the bedrail with all the strength she had left. Her mother had passed just weeks before. Her friends had all moved away. She didn't cry. Not once. She focused on breathing, focused on the rhythm of the monitors, focused on bringing life into the world, even if no one waited beside her to catch it. Hours passed. The pain came in waves, sharper and deeper. The nurse offered her words of comfort. The doctor was kind, but neither of them knew what it meant to give birth to a child whose father didn't even know she existed. Or worse, had chosen not to care. When the final push came, Leona gritted her teeth and whispered a single name into the room. Not his. Amira. She held her daughter against her chest and whispered, "You were never a mistake. You were always the reason." In that moment she felt something lift. Not the pain, but the fear. She wasn't broken. She wasn't abandoned. She was someone's mother now, and that would be enough. Back in the hospital, Leona turned her head toward the window, eyes stinging just slightly. She had never told anyone that story. She never needed to. Some truths were sacred, not because they were secrets, but because they lived in the quiet space where strength is born. She placed her hand gently over the bandage at her side. It hurt, but it also healed something deeper, she whispered to herself, barely loud enough for the words to take form. Let him live, not for me, for the man he still has a chance to become. And with that, she closed her eyes, knowing that somewhere above her, Caius Varelli was breathing easier. Because of her. And he would never know. The hospital hallway felt the same, but Leona wasn't. 3 weeks had passed since the surgery. The bruising had faded, the incision was healing well, and the world outside had moved on, as if nothing had changed. But inside her, something had shifted. She returned to her usual shifts at Roseville General, with the same calm presence she was known for. To her coworkers she looked the same, quiet, efficient, kind. The only difference was a subtle change in her walk, a slight stiffness when reaching too far, or a pause before lifting a tray. No one asked, and Leona never offered. What she had done was hers alone. Not even her closest colleagues, the ones who had cried with her on tough nights, or swapped shifts when Amira caught the flu, knew what she had given, and to whom. It was better that way. Back home, life picked up where it had paused. Amira had grown taller, or maybe Leona had just noticed it more since coming home. Her daughter greeted her at the door with a drawing in hand, 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright orange sun. "I missed you," Amira said, throwing her arms around her mother. Leona knelt to hold her, wincing slightly but never letting it show. I missed you more. I made you this, Amira said, handing over the picture. It's us. You're wearing a cape. Leona smiled. A cape? You're a hero. But secret heroes don't tell people. They just help and smile. Leona looked down at the drawing and swallowed the lump in her throat. I think you're the only hero I need, she said softly. Amira beamed, then ran off to fetch her toy stethoscope. As the evening settled and the warmth of dinner filled the house, Leona watched her daughter from across the table. So much of Caius lived in Amira, the tilt of her head when thinking, the way her eyes narrowed, when trying to read too fast, the soft dimple in her left cheek when she laughed. She had promised herself never to project that pain onto her child. Amira deserved her own story. And if Leona had her way, it would be one filled with truth, strength, and love, not silence and loss. Still, she couldn't ignore the sense of closeness she now felt. Not to Caius, but to the idea of resolution. She had made peace with the past. Or so she told herself. Until the next week, when everything began to shift. Leona's favorite part of the hospital was the pediatric playroom. It was tucked away on the third floor, brightly lit, filled with soft laughter, and painted in cheerful colors. For patients and visitors alike, it was a quiet haven where healing came in the form of crayons and storybooks. That Thursday, Amira had come to the hospital with a mild fever. Leona didn't want to leave her home alone, and the staff at the nurse station insisted she take a longer break to stay with her daughter. 15 minutes, Leona said, settling into the corner of the playroom with Amira curled beside her in a fuzzy blanket. Amira didn't say much at first. She clutched her favorite stuffed animal, a sleepy-eyed bunny with a crooked ear, and watched the other kids build towers from colorful blocks. Leona gently brushed Amira's hair back from her forehead. You doing okay? Amira nodded. Just sleepy. Want to lie down? No. I want to talk. Leona smiled. What do you want to talk about? There was a pause. Then Amira said, very softly, Do you think people can love someone and still hurt them? The words were so unexpected, so precise, that Leona didn't speak for a moment. She looked into her daughter's eyes and saw something far beyond her years. Something thoughtful, maybe even aching, though Amira couldn't yet name it. Where did that come from? Leona asked gently. Amira shrugged. I was just thinking. About what? Another pause. Sometimes I have dreams. About a man. Leona's heart began to thump. Amira continued. He has dark eyes, like mine, and he looks sad, but not mean. I think he knows me, even though I've never met him. Leona kept her voice steady. Do you talk to him in the dreams? Sometimes, not with words, but I feel like I know him. There it was, that quiet, almost invisible string connecting the child to her father, even if only through instinct. Leona's throat tightened. Do you think about your dad? Amira hesitated. Only sometimes. I know I don't have one like my friends do, but I don't feel lonely. You're not, Leona said softly, wrapping an arm around her. You're never alone. Amira leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. I know. You're enough. Leona kissed her forehead and tried not to let the emotion show. There were no easy answers. But her daughter wasn't asking for those. She was asking to be heard. And Leona would always listen. The hospital buzzed with quiet excitement. Word had spread quickly. Caius Varelli was in the building. After weeks of recovery, the tech magnate had reappeared, not as a patient, but as a philanthropist. His foundation had pledged funding for the hospital's new pediatric wing, and today, he was scheduled to tour the children's floor. Staff whispered behind clipboards. Doctors rehearsed their greetings. Nurses smoothed their scrubs. A few even hoped for a photo. Leona stayed far from the commotion. She didn't want to see him, not because of fear, because she had already said goodbye, just not out loud. Instead, she slipped into the playroom, where Amira lay curled on a beanbag chair with a picture book spread across her lap. Still feeling warm? Leona asked softly. A little, Amira said, but I'm okay. Leona took a seat beside her, grateful for the stillness in the room. The rest of the hospital felt like it was holding its breath, but here, time moved slowly. Amira turned a page, then looked up. Mommy, she said quietly, do you think everyone deserves a second chance? Leona blinked. That's a big question. Amira nodded solemnly. I think about it a lot, like, if someone made a really big mistake but they said sorry and meant it, does that fix things? Leona didn't answer right away. She looked down at her daughter, whose eyes were wide and honest, filled with the kind of wisdom that only came from love. "Sometimes," Leona said slowly, "saying sorry isn't enough, but showing up, over and over again, that can change things." Amira tilted her head. "So, people can come back?" Leona ran her fingers gently through Amira's curls. "Sometimes they do." Just then, the door creaked open. Leona turned, expecting a nurse or perhaps another parent, but it wasn't either. It was him. Caius stepped inside, flanked by a hospital administrator and a quiet assistant with a tablet in hand. His suit was simple, his expression focused. He looked stronger than he had weeks ago, still pale, but no longer fading. Leona's breath caught. She didn't move. Neither did he. For a split second, time seemed to stop. His eyes landed on her first, soft but stunned. Then, they drifted downward, to the child beside her, and something in his face changed. Recognition flickered. He took one slow step forward, then paused. Leona stood, heart racing, shielding Amira just slightly with her body. "Don't," she said under her breath. "Not here." Caius's mouth parted, but no sound came. Amira looked between them, confused. Then she spoke, her voice innocent and unshaken. "Mommy, is that my daddy?" Leona froze. The words hovered in the air, suspended between past and present, pain and possibility. Caius stared at the little girl. His face shifted, not with arrogance, not with control, but with something softer, something real. He took another step. Leona's hand gently touched Amira's shoulder. The administrator cleared her throat, sensing the shift in energy. "We can continue the tour if—" Caius held up his hand without breaking eye contact. But he said nothing. Leona looked away first. The moment was already too full. If you've ever had a conversation with a child that made you see the world differently, share it in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if you're still with us on the trail. There's more to come. The silence in the playroom was different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was thick, like the moment just before a confession, a kind of silence that pressed into your chest and waited for breath. Leona stood still, her body a barrier between Caius and Amira. Her heart pounded, but her face held. She had imagined this moment before. Hundreds of ways it could happen. None of them looked like this. Caius took a slow step forward. His eyes never left the little girl at Leona's side. "She's mine," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a demand. It was a realization falling from his lips like a truth he already knew. Leona didn't answer immediately. She knelt beside Amira, who was still watching curiously, her fingers gently clutching the edge of her blanket. "It's okay," Leona said softly to her daughter. "Why don't you go sit in the reading corner for a little bit?" Amira nodded, sensing something had shifted in the air. She walked across the room and settled into a small beanbag, flipping open a picture book without looking at the pages. Leona straightened slowly, then faced Caius. "How long have you known?" she asked. He took a breath. "Since I walked in. The moment I saw her face." Leona crossed her arms, not from anger but from restraint. "She's 6, born in March." His jaw tensed. "You never told me." "You disappeared," she said simply. There was no venom in her voice, just truth delivered without decoration. Caius closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were clouded, not with pride or ego, but something far more fragile. "I never wanted to leave you," he said. "But I was forced." Leona didn't flinch. "No one holds a gun to your heart. You made your choice." "I was 24, he said, voice tight. "My company was just taking off. Investors were circling. I was young, in love, and careless with timing. When the board found out I was seeing someone they couldn't control, they gave me an ultimatum." He paused. "End it, or lose everything." Leona blinked. "And you chose?" "Everything. I thought I was protecting you," he said. "I thought, if I cut ties, you'd be safe from their world, from what they were capable of. I thought walking away was better than dragging you through the fire." Her arms dropped to her sides. "You could have called. You could have said something." "I was scared," he admitted. "And stupid. I thought time would pass and maybe I could come back when it was safe." "You don't get to rewrite it now," she said. "I went through labor alone. I raised her alone. I buried my mother alone. All while you were building your empire in silence." Caius looked down. His shoulders slumped. Not from defeat, but from weight he could no longer carry. "I was wrong," he said. "Every single part of it. I was wrong. Every single part of it." Caius's words hung between them. Leona's expression didn't shift, but something in her eyes flickered, an emotion too layered to name. She moved past him toward the window, arms folded again, not from cold, but to hold herself in place. For years she had rehearsed what she'd say if this moment ever came. But now that it was here, no rehearsed words would do. "You don't get to come back just because the storm passed," she said quietly. "I built a life with silence as my foundation. I made peace with your absence, and now you're standing here like time didn't happen." "I know I can't erase anything," he said. "I know I don't deserve kindness, but please, just talk to me." She turned around slowly. "You want me to talk?" He nodded. "Fine," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't break. It simply told the truth. "I was 23, finishing nursing school. I thought I had found something real with you. I held on to your words like they were promises. I waited for you after you disappeared. I called your number until it stopped ringing. I wrote letters I never mailed." He looked up at her. "Letters?" She nodded. "All addressed to you. I'd write after long shifts, after Amira cried through the night, after I graduated alone, after I held her in my arms and realized I'd be doing this without you." "I didn't know," he whispered. "No, you didn't care to know," she said, steady but pained. "You vanished, and I convinced myself you must have had a reason. But as the years passed, that reason didn't matter anymore, because I had a child to raise, and she needed all of me." Caius stepped forward but stopped himself. "Can I read them?" She shook her head. "They weren't for you. They were for the version of you I thought existed." Silence again. This one softer, no longer thick with shock, but heavy with understanding. Caius's voice was quieter now. "Is she happy?" Leona's face softened just slightly. "She's loved. She's brilliant. She asks questions that most adults don't know how to answer, and she doesn't carry your absence like a wound, because I never let it define her." He swallowed. "I want to be in her life. I know that's asking for more than I deserve, but you don't get to ask for anything," she cut in. "This isn't about what you want. It's about what's best for her." Caius nodded slowly. "Then let me earn it." Leona held his gaze for a long moment, her expression unreadable, but her silence said everything. The door creaked again as a nurse peeked into the room. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't realize." Leona nodded politely, and the door closed again with a quiet click. Caius looked past her to the reading corner, where Amira was still sitting, hugging her bunny. "I don't even know her favorite color," he said softly, "or how she likes her sandwiches cut, or what story she wants to hear before bed." Leona's voice lowered. "She likes stars. Purple's her favorite. She eats the crust if you tell her it makes her strong. And her bedtime story changes every night, but she always wants the ending to feel safe." Caius's throat moved as he swallowed the emotion building inside. "She's mine," he said again. "I see it now. The way she sits, her curiosity, her eyes." "You don't get to claim her just because she looks like you," Leona replied. "Being her father will take more than DNA." "I know." Leona hesitated for a long moment. "She's never asked about you, not in a way that felt like longing, but she's intuitive. She sees more than I say." Caius nodded. "May I speak to her?" Leona didn't answer immediately. Then she looked over her shoulder. "Amira?" The little girl looked up. "Yes. Someone would like to meet you." Amira stood, adjusting the hem of her cardigan. She walked over, stopping just in front of Caius. He crouched down slowly, lowering himself to her eye level. "Hi," he said, his voice softer than it had ever been. Amira tilted her head. "Are you the man from my dream?" Caius blinked. "I don't know. What happens in your dream?" "You look at me like you're trying to remember something important," she said simply. "Like you lost something, and then found it again." He almost lost his breath. "I think," she continued, "you were supposed to be somewhere but you got stuck." Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. "That's a very good way to describe it." She studied his face with quiet curiosity. "Do I have a daddy now?" Caius looked up at Leona, seeking permission. Leona's face didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It simply waited. He turned back to Amira. "If you'll let me," he whispered. "I'd like to try." Amira thought for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Leona looked away, just for a second, because sometimes when something finally begins to heal, it hurts first. He didn't run. That's what Leona noticed first. After that moment in the playroom, after Amira's innocent question and the quiet that followed, Caius didn't disappear like he once had. He stayed. He didn't arrive with flowers or apologies written in poetry. He didn't make speeches. He just started showing up. Every Wednesday after school, he was waiting outside the classroom with a small snack and a gentle smile. On Saturdays, he joined them at the community library, where Amira picked out books far above her grade level and asked impossible questions about the stars. At first, Leona stood on the sidelines watching. She watched how Caius listened to Amira, not just with his ears, but with his entire posture. He leaned in. He laughed with her. He knelt when she spoke so they'd be the same height. He made no demands, no declarations. He simply came back, one day at a time. Amira adjusted quickly. Children are like that. When love shows up and stays, they don't overthink it. They reach for it. One evening, Leona overheard them whispering during story time. Amira was asking about constellations. Caius, without hesitation, told her stories behind each name, not from a textbook, but like they were family legends. Leona stood in the hallway, unseen, and let herself feel the warmth creep in. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something softer. The weeks folded into months. Spring melted into summer, and Rosevale bloomed with gentle sun and sleepy afternoons. Caius started helping with more than playtime. He showed up for school concerts, waited patiently in 2 small chairs during parent-teacher meetings, and helped Amira build a solar system for her science project, complete with moving planets. He got glue on his suit. He laughed about it. Leona watched as the man who once vanished became a man who stayed. He didn't do everything perfectly, but he was there, not for show, for her, for Amira, and slowly that mattered more than the past. Dinner at Leona's house used to be just 2 plates, a small table, and soft music humming from the kitchen radio. Now, there were 3 chairs, and more laughter. Caius never assumed a role. He asked before doing anything. He offered to set the table. He helped Amira peel potatoes, badly. She found it hilarious. They didn't talk much about the past. They didn't need to. Instead, they talked about 3rd grade math and how Amira had finally beat the fastest kid in her class during gym. Caius leaned into the small things, the moments most people missed. He asked Leona if Amira still needed her nightlight. She did. He offered to bring her favorite books from the city. He remembered the titles she mentioned once in passing. He never tried to take up space that wasn't given. Leona noticed. She noticed the way he waited after Amira went to bed, sitting at the edge of the couch, quiet, not expecting anything. Sometimes they'd talk. She'd make tea. He'd help her bring in the laundry if she was late getting home. One night, the porch was cooler than usual. Leona handed him a blanket without a word, and he wrapped it over his legs like it was the most natural thing in the world. They sat in silence, sipping tea, the stars stretched above them. "Did you ever think," he said, "that we'd find ourselves like this again?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't. I still don't understand how you forgave me enough to let me back in her life." Leona stared at the sky. "I didn't forgive you." He blinked. "I just chose not to let the pain decide everything." He didn't respond. There was nothing to add. And still, something in the air shifted. Not closure, something better. Peace. It was late. The kind of late where the world had fallen quiet, and the stars blinked like soft reminders overhead. Leona sat on the porch swing, wrapped in her cardigan, legs tucked to one side. The air smelled like warm earth and old memories. Caius stepped outside, 2 mugs in hand. "I made it just like you like," he said. Leona raised an eyebrow. "You don't know how I like it." He smiled faintly. "I guessed." She took the mug and sipped. Not bad. They rocked slowly, side by side, the rhythm easy. Amira had gone to bed hours earlier after begging for one more chapter of her book. Caius had read it with enthusiasm. Leona had stood in the doorway, watching without interrupting. Now, it was just the 2 of them. "Do you ever think about that night?" Caius asked. Leona didn't need clarification. "I've thought about it more than I care to admit." He turned to look at her. I should have fought harder. I should have asked more questions, she replied. They sat with that, not in guilt, but in shared responsibility. A shooting star streaked quietly above them. Caius leaned back. She's the best part of both of us. She is, Leona said, her voice softer now. She's made of second chances. There was a pause. Then he shifted slightly. I saw the scar, he said. On your side, a few weeks ago. The way you move sometimes, slower than you used to. Leona didn't speak. I put it together. He said gently, you were the donor. She didn't look at him. I never planned to tell you. I know. I didn't do it for you. I know that too. They were quiet again. Then Caius whispered, why? Leona finally turned to him, her eyes steady, because love doesn't keep score. He looked at her for a long time, like he was memorizing her all over again. Not the girl he once kissed under the sycamore tree, but the woman who had carried a child, buried pain, and still found a way to give life, to him, to Amira, to herself. She stood and stretched slightly. Good night, Caius. As she reached the door, she paused. I don't know where this goes, she said without turning around. But I see how she looks at you, and I see how you look at her. That's enough for now. Then she stepped inside, leaving him with the stars. What would you do if someone from your past asked for a second chance? Let us know in the comments. And if this story touches your heart, please share it. Every voice matters. Every share helps the next story begin. Time moved differently now. There were no grand announcements, no labels placed on what they were or where they were going. But something had changed, something real. Leona no longer watched Caius with hesitation. Instead, she observed him with the kind of quiet awareness only a woman who had been hurt could carry. Not suspicious, just awake. Healing didn't make her naive. It made her discerning. She had forgiven him, but she hadn't erased anything. Forgiveness, she learned, wasn't a clean slate. It was a release, a choice to move forward without carrying the weight of the wound every single day. She didn't forget the silence, the unanswered calls, the lonely labor room. But she didn't live there anymore either. She lived here, in this small house, where Amira's laughter filled every corner. In the shared moments of everyday life, grocery trips, spilled cereal, bedtime giggles. Caius had become part of those moments. He didn't force himself in. He asked. He learned. He adapted. He still worked long hours, but he made them count. He moved meetings when needed. He rescheduled flights to show up for parent-teacher conferences. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just tried. One evening, Amira came home with a scraped knee. Leona reached for the first aid kit, but Caius was already crouching in front of her. It's okay, I've got this, he said softly. He cleaned the scrape, applied the ointment, and placed the bandage with a precision that made Leona smile. You've been practicing, she said. I've been learning, he replied. Parenting wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. And he was present, even when he didn't have all the answers. Even when Amira threw a tantrum over bedtime or refused to eat anything but toast for 3 days straight. He stayed calm. He didn't try to be the fun parent or the hero. He tried to be steady. And for Leona, that mattered more than anything. One night, after a long day, Caius offered to do the dishes while Leona helped Amira with her spelling words. Leona watched them from the kitchen door, Amira scribbling, Caius at the sink, music playing low in the background. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And sometimes that was even better. They didn't post pictures. There were no filtered announcements, no matching family outfits arranged for attention. No one in the world would have guessed that the man once seen on magazine covers now spent his Friday evenings helping his daughter build blanket forts. Caius never asked to be seen. He only asked to be included. And Leona, she never needed the world to validate what was real. Their life wasn't curated. It was lived. There were still hard days. Caius sometimes questioned if he'd ever make up for the years he lost. He'd sit at the edge of Amira's bed after she fell asleep and whisper, I wish I'd been there from the start. Leona, hearing from the hallway, would say nothing. But the next morning, she'd place an extra apple in his bag for the school run. That was her answer. They didn't rush anything between them. There was no countdown to a proposal. No pressure to define their relationship with a label. It was slow, careful, built on the ground they had both learned to stand on, separately. They took walks through the park on Sunday mornings while Amira rode her bike ahead of them. They talked about her future, about nothing, about everything. Sometimes they sat on the porch in silence, sipping tea. Sometimes they stayed up late in the kitchen, talking like old friends who had weathered too many storms to pretend anymore. And on one particularly still night, Caius reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "I don't know where this road ends, but I want to walk it beside you, at your pace." Leona didn't answer right away, but she didn't let go. That was enough. Healing had never been about rushing back to what was lost. It was about building something better from what remained. Years from now, when Amira looked back, she wouldn't remember the details of what went wrong between her parents. She'd remember the way her mother's hand always reached for hers in crowds. She'd remember how her father always stayed until the lights turned off after her school performances. She'd remember warmth, and safety, and quiet, consistent love. And maybe that was the lesson. That love, real love, wasn't loud. It didn't shout to prove itself. It stayed. It grew. It forgave, not to erase, but to make room for something better. Some stories end with fireworks, others with a final kiss or a whispered vow, but some end more quietly, with hands held across time, wounds stitched not by words, but by presence. This was one of those stories. Leona never needed the world to see what she had done. She didn't need recognition or revenge or even an apology wrapped in gold. She just needed peace. And in choosing to give what was never owed, she found it. Not in a perfect ending, but in one she wrote on her own terms. Here are the lessons hidden within her journey. Lessons not spoken loudly, but felt deeply. 1. Love without expectation. Leona gave the most selfless gift one human can give to another, a second chance at life. She didn't give it out of bitterness. She didn't do it as a test or as bait for closure. She did it knowing full well that Caius may never know. Because real love, quiet, unwavering love, isn't transactional. It's not a deal. It doesn't come with conditions. It gives because it chooses to, even when no one is watching. And sometimes, the kindest acts are the ones no one claps for. 2. People can change. Caius was once the man who vanished when it mattered most. He didn't disappear out of cruelty, but out of fear and weakness. Still a betrayal, but a human one. And when given the smallest crack of grace, he didn't rush through it with pride. He walked back slowly. He showed up, not just for Leona, but for the little girl he never got to meet the day she was born. His change wasn't immediate. It was earned through late-night bedtime stories, forgotten math homework, and the thousand small ways he learned to be a father. Because redemption isn't loud either. It's made in dishes washed, apologies shown, and futures protected. 3. Forgiveness heals. Leona didn't forgive because it was easy. She forgave because holding on was heavier than letting go. But she didn't erase the pain. She didn't pretend it never happened. She chose to remember and still move forward. That's real forgiveness. It's not a performance. It's a quiet decision to stop drinking the poison meant for someone else. She didn't open the door and forget what came before it. She simply unlocked it and waited to see who would walk through. 4. Children deserve truth and love. Amira was never used as leverage. She was never fed bitterness disguised as protection. Leona shielded her daughter from resentment, not by lying, but by living honestly. She gave Amira a home where love was consistent and healing was possible. And when the time came to open that door wider, she allowed her daughter to decide how to step through it. That's the greatest gift a child can receive, truth delivered gently, and love that does not need to compete. 5. Strength comes in silence. Leona didn't raise her voice. She didn't write a public letter. She didn't explode when Caius returned. Instead, she spoke with action, with grace, with boundaries that weren't drawn in anger, but in wisdom. We often forget that strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like walking away. And sometimes it looks like walking back in, with your head high, your heart intact, and your peace unshaken. A question for you. As you take in this story, ask yourself, who have you forgiven quietly? Who gave you life when you didn't deserve it? What scar do you carry that reminds you of your strength, not your pain? We all have stories that no one else knows, but maybe, just maybe, the quietest ones are the ones that carry the most meaning. If you believe in stories that heal, help, and inspire, don't just scroll past. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more tales that remind us what it truly means to be human. Thank you for walking this story trail with us. Until next time. Stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the quiet ones.